All right, thanks so much for joining me today, guys. I have a very special guest for the interview today, Megan Rodriguez, an FSU student and former president of the Turning Point USA chapter here at Florida State University. Megan, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, of course.
So, tell me a little bit about your experience as Florida State University's Turning Point chapter president. What was that like? I know there's a lot of opposition to conservative groups on college campuses, especially at Florida State University, where we've both experienced that greatly. But fill me in on what happened during your time as president of the Turning Point chapter.
So for myself, I was the president of the TPSA chapter for the 2022-2023 school year. And it was honestly such a dream come true because as I was going into it, I was talking to my predecessor, Trenton Curtis, that, they were in the works to have Charlie Kirk on campus, and that if I was the president, I would be the one in charge of or be like the student to help, make that happen by acting as like the communicator or like kind of like the bridge between to the Turning Point organization and Florida State University, because you're not allowed to like book an event on campus without like it being like through a student. So like from May of 2022 to literally the day of the event, it was like every week we had like meetings regarding the event, emails being sent back and forth. When the school year started, oh my gosh, and when we announced the event, that's when my name really started to get out there as far as like everybody, knew who I was, just because like, when you're bringing a speaker like Charlie Kirk, you're pretty much putting yourself like in a position for scrutiny. And I mean, I knew that going into it. As far as like opposition from the left, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was gonna be. Um, I mean, I did get a lot of like death threats on social media, a lot of terrible things, a lot of lovely names being called during that time. Like I was called a gusano, I was called white supremacist, I was called just like every typical like terrible name in the book. But the irony behind it is like they don't even know me at all, and every assumption they made could not be any further from the truth.
I've
So
had a similar experience. A lot of oh, sorry to cut you off.
no,
Um,
you guys.
But I've had a similar experience. I think a lot of conservative students experience this on campus a lot, getting called names when they're engaging in activism on college campuses, getting death threats, all that stuff. Focusing on the Charlie Kirk event, this was in October of 2022, I believe, because Campus Reform covered the event and the subsequent protests from the left. Who was engaging in these protests? What leftist group was conducting these? The Kirk off campus essentially is what it was called.
So so it was a mix between like FSU college Democrats and this organization called Students for Democrat Society, which I want to point out how ironic it is that they call themselves that because they sell communist buttons and they praise people like Fidel Castro and stuff, which they didn't even know this. As a Cuban American, that is like honestly the most offensive thing that you could possibly bring to a campus, especially because we have like a Cuban American student organization, which I'm also part of. And it's kind of ironic though, the person who led SDS at the time, I was sort of going like undercover at the time. They didn't even know I was the president, and he was a white male who was probably queer, who looks like he grew up in the States and like all that stuff. And he was the one telling me, a female, you know, Cuban American whose family, risked their lives fleeing communism, that I was a white supremacist, that I was a product of white privilege. I was just all these terrible things. Little did they know they were literally talking to the TPUSA chapter president. They're saying, yeah, the chapter president on campus is a straight white male and all that stuff, and he's a white supremacist and a nationalist doing all these things. I'm like, I had no idea. This is a bombshell to me.
It's ironic how their logic works, isn't it?
Yeah.
And speaking specifically of the death threats that you received on social media and all that, can you go into a little more detail of that? What backlash have you experienced as a student on campus and or as Turning Point's president? Backlash in the form of DMs, hateful messages, or smearing your name on campus, or concocting weird schemes about, oh, this person's engaged in this activity when it's really not true. So just lies altogether. What forms of backlash from the left have you received for engaging in conservative activism?
So I mainly got them as it was getting closer, like to the Kirk event, when people like started to really pay more attention to it, and SDS announced they were doing like a protest. I was being told that I'm pretty hypocritical, that like I'm against women and all that stuff. That again, that I'm a white supremacist, that I only believe in white privilege. I have no idea what it's like to suffer, or neither does my family and stuff. I'm only a right winger because my family is. Which if anybody like wants to know a little bit about like just like a very like brief summary of like my background. So my family, like, they fled communism, both in the 60s. I have family that fled in the early 2000s, and I still have family on the island right now. My family actually used to be Democrats, and so was myself at one point. We didn't vote Republican until Trump in 2016. Well, my mom voted for Mitt Romney in 2012, but my father still voted for Obama. But like during that time, like we really started to like wake up to see like what the party has become, and seeing how, also because like our newfound like Christian beliefs, how we align more with the Republican Party. If anybody wants to know, like, I don't need someone to like tell me like because I'm this and this that I need to vote a certain way. Like I can think for myself and come to my own conclusions. But as far as like the DNs like on social media, a lot of them unsurprisingly had colored hair, they had their pronouns in their bio, had some sort of like, they were not straight, you know. Like I was noticing, I'm not like hating on anybody who's like that, but I noticed a trend. Like I'm starting to notice a trend. And like basically just like telling me all these things, saying that I should go kill myself. They hope that I get, raped, and all these like terrible things, just making all these like just assumptions about me. And honestly, like it really did hurt me, just because like they really don't know me at all, but yet they can come to all these different conclusions about me.
Right. And now going off of that, my final question, for other conservative students who might be facing similar or having similar experiences on their college campuses around the country, what would you tell other conservative students such as yourself who are, wavering in their conservative beliefs and who might be crumbling under this pressure? What would you tell conservative students who are afraid to stand up for their beliefs on college campuses?
If you feel like you're in a situation where you feel like it might be dangerous, definitely like record it and stuff, and like obviously like don't like engage in like, if they throw like a punch, like don't punch them back and stuff, because like you just want to like show that at the end of the day they're the ones like who are causing all this chaos and stuff. Like we believe in like freedom of speech and whatnot, but like just stand firm in your beliefs. Don't believe anything that they're telling you about the other side. Like you need to think for yourself and just stand up for yourself, which I feel like it did get better over time. Just people like accepted my beliefs. Like even this one guy from college Democrats, he like him and I actually did have like civil discourse about like the communism in Cuba, and he was like he came to the conclusion that like I wasn't a white supremacist, I wasn't all these terrible things that generically the people from SDS would call us, and that like there is such thing as civil discourse. Like I'm not going to hate someone like for their beliefs or shut down free speech, despite the SDS saying that they want like more freedoms for people and all that stuff. And another thing I would say is in response to SDS, because they try to debate communism with me and how like capitalism does this, this, and this, and now I'm a terrible person for believing in it. I get called so many things. I think a common one, like if this is on Family Food, this is the number one answer. I get called a Batista sympathizer, which I think is the most hilarious thing, that my family like owned slaves in Cuba. I'm like, slavery in Cuba was outlawed in the 1880s, 1860s, during that time. So like before my family even got to Cuba. And something I can really just say about like the issue of like socialism is, and like you can take what I'm about to say, like the idea of communism and socialism in America is the single biggest slap in the face to any immigrant who risked their lives just to get here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. My family immigrated, or dad's side of the family immigrated from Romania to the United States
Oh wow.
from communism as well. Megan, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, of course.
All right, and that